They laughed when she picked up the rifle. They laughed harder when she said she'd outshoot any man on base. But nobody was laughing when the bullet left her barrel and changed everything they thought they knew about courage. Before we continue, drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. The Arizona desert stretched endless and unforgiving under a sun that felt like punishment. Fort Huachuca shimmered in waves of heat that made the distant mountains look like they were melting into the sky. This was where the United States Army trained its best, where soldiers became something more than human, where weakness died and legends were born. And this was where Sierra Valdez was about to prove that everything they believed about her was wrong. Sierra had grown up in the mountains of Colorado, in a cabin so remote that the nearest neighbor was 7 miles away. Her father, a former Army Ranger turned wilderness guide, had taught her to track elk before she could read chapter books, to identify wind patterns by watching how aspen leaves trembled, to calculate distance and elevation by instinct rather than tools. When a rock slide took him during a rescue operation when she was 16, Sierra made a promise over his flag-draped coffin that she would finish what he started, that she would serve with the same fierce integrity that had defined his entire life. Now, at 27, she stood in the scorching heat of sniper school, one of only 3 women in a class of 48, and the only one the instructors seemed determined to break. She was small, barely 5'4", with sun-darkened skin and black hair she kept in a tight braid that fell between her shoulder blades. Her eyes were the color of honey, held up to light, warm and clear. But there was something in them that made people look twice, something that spoke of mountains and silence and patience that most people would never understand. She moved with an economy of motion that came from growing up in places where wasted energy could mean death, where every step had to count. The other recruits noticed her immediately, not because she stood out, but because she seemed to occupy space differently, as if she existed on a frequency just slightly offset from everyone else. And then there was Staff Sergeant Marcus Iron Keller. Keller was everything the Army put on: recruiting posters. 6'2", square-jawed, with shoulders that seemed to have been carved from the same granite as Mount Rushmore. He had deployed 4 times, had a chest full of commendations, and a reputation for being the hardest instructor in sniper school. His nickname came from his personality, not his physique, though both seemed equally inflexible. He had ice-blue eyes that could strip paint off walls and a voice that sounded like gravel being poured into a cement mixer. And from the moment Sierra arrived, he had made it his personal mission to prove she didn't belong. It started small, a comment during the first equipment inspection about how her rifle seemed too big for her hands, a pointed question during a ballistics lecture about whether she understood the math. Gansvolved, delivered with just enough condescension to make several other recruits snicker, a suggestion during physical training that maybe she should consider a support role instead, something that didn't require quite so much upper body strength. Each remark was calculated, precise, designed to chip away at confidence the same way water eventually splits stone. Sierra absorbed it all without reaction. She had learned long ago that the mountains don't care about your feelings, that nature is neither cruel nor kind, but simply indifferent, and that the only response to hardship is to become harder yourself. She said nothing, showed nothing, just tightened her jaw and kept moving forward. But Keller wasn't satisfied with silence. He needed submission. The first week of training focused on the fundamentals: shooting positions, breathing techniques, trigger control, range estimation. These were things Sierra had been doing since she was 8 years old, muscle memory encoded so deeply that she could perform them in her sleep. But Keller treated every movement she made as suspect, every shot she fired as lucky rather than skilled. When she scored perfect on the 100-yard qualification, he accused her of guessing the wind. When she assembled her rifle in record time during a timed exercise, he demanded she do it again, claiming he hadn't started his stopwatch properly. When she volunteered an answer during a camouflage lecture, he cut her off mid-sentence and told her that in his experience, good snipers talked less and listened more. The other recruits watched, this with varying degrees of discomfort. Some seemed embarrassed for her. Others seemed relieved that Keller's legendary intensity was focused on someone else. A few, emboldened by their instructor's example, began adding their own comments. Small things. A muttered joke about diversity requirements when she missed a shot. A suggestion that maybe she was only here because the Army needed to meet quotas. An exaggerated offer of help carrying her gear, delivered with just enough smirk to make it clear the offer wasn't genuine. Sierra felt every word like a blade sliding between her ribs, but she kept her face empty and her hands steady. She thought about her father, about the way he'd taught her that respect couldn't be given, only earned, and that the earning happened in silence and through action. She thought about the promise she'd made, and how promises meant nothing if you abandoned them the moment things got difficult. By the second week, Keller had escalated. During a field exercise in the Huachuca Mountains, he assigned her the worst position, a rocky outcropping with no shade and no cover, where the sun concentrated like a magnifying glass over an anthill. While other students rotated through various scenarios, Sierra spent 6 hours prone on burning stone, tracking targets through her scope, while sweat poured into her eyes and her arms trembled with exhaustion. When she finally took her shot, hitting a target at 800 yards in a crosswind that was pushing everything 3 feet left, Keller walked over, examined the result, and said loud enough for everyone to hear that she must have gotten lucky with the wind, because there was no way she'd actually calculated that correction properly. Something inside Sierra cracked that day. Just a hairline fracture, barely visible, but there. That night, lying in her bunk while her muscles screamed and her sunburned skin felt like it was on fire, she allowed herself one moment of doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was fooling herself. Maybe the mountains of Colorado and the deserts of Arizona were two completely different worlds, and competence in one didn't translate to the other. Then she thought about her father's hands, scarred and strong, guiding her finger to the trigger for the first time. She thought about his voice, patient and certain, telling her that shooting wasn't about strength or size, but about understanding, about becoming part of the system rather than fighting against it. She thought about the way he'd looked at her the last time she saw him alive, the pride in his eyes when she'd made a shot he'd thought impossible, the way he'd said, "That's my girl," with such absolute conviction that she'd felt like she could do anything. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she lay in the dark and rebuilt herself from the inside out, taking every doubt and fear and humiliation and using them as raw materials, forging them into something harder and sharper than they'd been before. By the time the sun rose, Sierra Valdez had made a decision. She wasn't going to quit. She wasn't going to argue or defend herself or try to prove anything through words. She was going to become so undeniably competent that even Keller would have no choice but to acknowledge it. The third week brought urban combat scenarios. The class deployed to a mock village constructed specifically for training, a warren of buildings and alleys designed to simulate the chaos of asymmetric warfare. Snipers had to identify targets among civilians, make split-second decisions about threat, assessment, coordinate with ground teams, and maintain discipline under simulated combat stress. It was the most difficult phase of training, the point where most dropouts occurred, where the mental pressure exceeded the physical challenges, and students discovered what they were really made of. Keller assigned Sierra as Overwatch for a team led by one of his favorites, a recruit named Davidson, who had Marine Corps infantry experience and seemed to view the sniper course as a formality rather than a challenge. The scenario involved a hostage rescue. Davidson's team would breach the target building, while Sierra provided cover from a position 400 yards away, eliminating any threats that appeared in the windows or on the roof. It should have been straightforward, but Keller had rigged the scenario specifically to make Sierra fail. The moment Davidson's team entered the building, targets began appearing in rapid succession. Not 1 or 2, as would be realistic, but 6, then 8, then 12, popping up in windows across 3 different floors simultaneously. The rate of appearance made it impossible for a single shooter to engage them all. Sierra fired, cycled her bolt, acquired a new target, fired again, working with mechanical efficiency, but there were simply too many. Through her scope, she watched as simulated casualties mounted, as Davidson's team got killed one by one because she couldn't provide adequate cover. When the exercise ended, Keller called everyone together for the after-action review. He stood in the center of the group with his arms crossed, and his face set in an expression of profound disappointment. He went through the scenario step by step, analyzing every decision, every movement, and then he got to Sierra. "Valdez," he said, his voice carrying across the silent group. "You want to explain to these men why half of them are dead right now?" Sierra stood at attention, her face blank, her eyes focused on a point somewhere past Keller's shoulder. Multiple simultaneous targets exceeded single shooter capability, Staff Sergeant. That's your excuse. Too many targets? Keller stepped closer, his bulk casting a shadow over her. A real sniper adapts. A real sniper prioritizes. A real sniper doesn't let their team die because the situation is hard. He paused, letting the words sink in. Maybe the problem isn't the scenario. Maybe the problem is that you're not cut out for this. The silence that followed felt like pressure, like the air before a thunderstorm. Sierra could feel every eye on her, could sense the mixture of pity and agreement and schadenfreude radiating from the other recruits. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms hard enough to draw blood. "Do you have anything to say, Valdez?" She met his eyes for the first time, and something in her gaze made him blink. "No, Staff Sergeant." "Then maybe you should think real hard about whether you want to waste everyone's time by sticking around." He turned away dismissively. "Dismissed, we run it again tomorrow." That night, Sierra did something she hadn't done since arriving at Fort Huachuca. She went to the range after hours, using her personal ammunition allowance, and spent 4 hours shooting in the dark. Not at targets, but at her own limitations. She practiced transitions, moving from target to target with increasing speed, shaving milliseconds off her acquisition time, training her body to move faster than her conscious mind could process. She shot until her shoulder was bruised from recoil, until her fingers cramped around the trigger, until the rifle felt like an extension of her arms, rather than a tool she was wielding. The next day, they ran the scenario again. And this time, when the targets appeared in impossible succession, Sierra was ready. She had analyzed the pattern from the previous day, had identified the sequence and timing, and had prepared a strategy that prioritized threats based on their position relative to Davidson's team rather than their order of appearance. She moved through targets like a machine, precise and relentless, and when the exercise ended, Davidson's entire team walked out alive. Keller said nothing during the after-action review. He simply moved on to the next scenario. But something had shifted. The other recruits began watching Sierra differently, with a mixture of respect and wariness. They had seen her humiliated, had seen her pushed beyond what seemed reasonable, and they had seen her not only survive, but improve. Word spread through the class about the nighttime range sessions, about the dedication that went beyond what was required. Even the instructors who had previously ignored her began paying attention, began noticing the consistency of her performance, the quiet competence that didn't need to announce itself. Keller noticed too, and he didn't like it. By week 4, the training moved to advanced fieldcraft. Students deployed to remote locations for multi-day exercises, operating independently with minimal support, practicing the kind of patience and discipline that defined military sniping. This was where mental toughness mattered more than physical ability, where students learned to lie in the same position for 18 hours straight, where they discovered whether they could maintain focus and precision when every part of their body screamed for movement. Sierra thrived. The environment reminded her of home, of days spent tracking game through wilderness so remote that humans were the intruders, rather than the natives. She understood how to become part of the landscape, how to let time pass without impatience, how to maintain awareness while simultaneously entering a state of deep calm. While other students fidgeted and complained and struggled with the monotony, Sierra simply existed, watching and waiting with the same patience as the mountains themselves. Keller assigned her the most difficult stalk exercise of the training cycle. She had to move across 2 miles of open terrain in broad daylight, approach within 200 yards of an observation post manned by experienced instructors with high-powered optics, and simulate a shot without being detected. The terrain offered minimal cover, just scrub brush and shallow depressions, and the instructors were specifically watching. For her knew exactly where she would be coming from. Most students took 4 to 6 hours to complete the stalk. Sierra took 11. She moved so slowly that she barely seemed to move at all, advancing inches at a time, using every shadow and every contour of the ground, becoming part of the desert rather than a person crossing it. The instructors swept their optics across her position dozens of times without seeing her, dismissed shadows that were actually her body, looked directly at her concealed form, and saw nothing but landscape. When she finally reached her position and simulated the shot, one of the observers nearly jumped out of his skin. She had gotten within 150 yards, closer than the scenario required, and none of them had seen her coming. The lead instructor, a grizzled master sergeant with 25 years of experience, walked out to her position after she revealed herself. He looked at where she had been, at the minimal cover she had used, at the route she must have taken. Then he looked at her with something approaching awe. "That," he said quietly, "was the best stalk I've seen in 15 years of running this course." Keller heard about it. The next day, he announced that Sierra's performance had been adequate but not exceptional, that the instructors had probably been distracted, that the conditions had been favorable. He said it in front of the entire class, his voice dismissive and final, brooking no disagreement. Sierra said nothing, but later, when they were preparing gear for the next exercise, one of the other recruits approached. Her? His name was Chen, a quiet kid from California who had been in her class since day one. He glanced around to make sure Keller wasn't nearby, then spoke in a low voice. "We all know he's full of shit," Chen said. "What you did yesterday was insane. I've been trying to figure out how you even got that close without being seen." Sierra looked at him surprised. "You watched?" "Everyone watched. They broadcast it on monitors for the rest of the class." Chen grinned. "You made it look easy, like you were gliding across the ground. I've never seen anything like it." "It's not that complicated," Sierra said, uncomfortable with the attention. "You just have to be patient." "Yeah, well, some of us aren't built like that." Chen paused. "Look, I don't know why Keller has it out for you, but don't let him get in your head. You're the best shooter in this class, and everybody knows it except him." The words settled into Sierra like warmth, like standing in front of a fire after hours in the cold. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear them, how much the constant dismissal and criticism had been wearing her down despite her efforts to remain unaffected. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and Chen nodded back before walking away. But the support from her peers only seemed to make Keller more determined. He began inventing new ways to undermine her, new tests designed specifically to expose weakness. He assigned her night watches when others were sleeping, ensuring she operated on minimal rest. He gave her equipment that was slightly damaged or poorly maintained, forcing her to adapt to suboptimal conditions. He paired her with the weakest students during team exercises, creating situations where her success depended on carrying others who couldn't keep up. Sierra endured it all, but the cracks were spreading, the damage accumulating in ways that weren't immediately visible but were nonetheless real. She was losing weight, her face becoming gaunt, her eyes developing dark circles that no amount of sleep could erase. Her hands had begun trembling slightly when she wasn't focused on a task, a physiological response to sustained stress that she couldn't quite control. She was approaching a breaking point, and everyone could see it except her. Week 6 brought the final qualification exercise before graduation. The scenario was complex and realistic, designed to test every skill the students had learned. A high-value target would appear at an unknown time in an unknown location within a designated area approximately 1 square mile in size. Students would deploy individually, select their own positions, and wait for the target to appear. They would have one shot. Miss, and they failed the course. Succeed, and they graduated. The distance would be significant, over 1,000 yards, and the time window would be brief, less than 30 seconds from target appearance to disappearance. It was the culmination of everything they had trained for, the ultimate test of patience, skill, and discipline. Keller pulled Sierra aside the night before the exercise. They were alone in the equipment room, surrounded by rifles and optics and the smell of gun oil and canvas. His face was unreadable in the dim light, his voice low and intense. "I'm going to give you some advice, Valdez," he said, "not because I like you, but because I don't want to see you embarrass yourself tomorrow." Sierra stood at attention, waiting. "You've been lucky so far. You've had favorable conditions, easy scenarios, instructors who went soft on you because of politics. But tomorrow is different, tomorrow is real. And when that target appears, when you have one chance to prove you belong here, you're going to discover something about yourself." He leaned closer. "You're going to discover that being good in the mountains of Colorado doesn't mean shit in the real world. You're going to choke. And when you do, maybe you'll finally accept that this isn't where you're supposed to be." He straightened up, his face settling back into its usual mask of stern authority. "Get some rest, Valdez. You're going to need it." He walked out, leaving Sierra alone in the equipment room with the weight of his words pressing down on her shoulders like physical force. She stood there for a long time, surrounded by the tools of her trade, and thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her father, about the promise she had made, about the thousands of small humiliations and challenges she had endured to get here. She thought about Keller's certainty that she would fail, about the way he had been trying to break her from the beginning, about how much easier it would be to simply prove him right and walk away. Then, she thought about the mountains, about the way they stood regardless of weather or time, indifferent to human opinion, permanent and patient and utterly unmoved by anything as small as doubt. She thought about the lessons her father had taught her, about the way he had shown her that strength wasn't about force but about understanding, about becoming so aligned with your purpose that nothing could deflect you from it. Sierra left the equipment room with her jaw set and her eyes clear. She wasn't going to fail tomorrow. She was going to show everyone, including Keller, exactly what she was capable of. Not for them, but for herself, and for the memory of a man who had believed in her when no one else did. The next morning arrived cold and clear, the desert air sharp with the promise of another scorching day. The students deployed before dawn, each heading to their chosen position with their gear and their nerves and their determination. They spread out across the terrain like seeds scattered on the wind, each seeking the perfect spot, the ideal angle, the place where skill and luck and preparation would converge into a single perfect moment. Sierra moved through the pre-dawn darkness with absolute certainty. She had spent hours studying topographic maps, analyzing sightlines and wind patterns and escape routes. She had identified her position days ago, had visualized the shot so many times that it felt like memory rather than imagination. She knew exactly where she needed to be, and she moved toward it with the single-minded focus of water flowing downhill, taking the path of least resistance but ultimately unstoppable. Her position was a rocky outcropping on the western edge of the operational area, elevated just enough to provide clear sight lines while remaining concealed from casual observation. It wasn't the most obvious choice, which made it perfect. She settled into place as the sun began painting the eastern sky with shades of orange and gold, arranging her body and her equipment with meticulous care, becoming part of the landscape rather than an intrusion upon it. And then she waited. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, the temperature rising with it, until the rocks beneath her became almost too hot to touch. Sweat gathered at her hairline and ran down her temples, but she didn't move to wipe it away. Her breathing remained steady and slow, her heart rate barely elevated above resting. She existed in a state between sleep and wakefulness, her conscious mind quiet, while her awareness remained sharp and focused. She thought about her father, about the last hunt they had taken together. They had waited in a tree stand for an entire day, barely speaking, just existing together in comfortable silence while the forest moved. Around them, he had taught her that hunting wasn't about killing. It was about patience, about understanding the rhythm of the wild world, and fitting yourself into it so seamlessly that you became invisible. The deer had walked within 20 yards of their position without knowing they were there, and her father hadn't even raised his rifle. "We're not hungry," he'd said quietly, "and sometimes the greatest act of mastery is choosing not to take the shot." Sierra understood now what he had been teaching her. It wasn't about dominance or conquest, it was about discipline, about the control that came from knowing you could act, but choosing instead to wait for the right moment. The sun reached its zenith. Noon came and went. The afternoon stretched out like melted glass, distorted and surreal. Sierra's body ached from immobility, her muscles cramping, her joints stiff, but she didn't move. She maintained her position with the patience of stone, watching and waiting and trusting that the moment would come. At approximately 15:30 hours, something changed. It was subtle, just a shift in the quality of light or sound that indicated movement in the distance. Sierra's eyes, which had been sweeping slowly across the landscape in a careful pattern, focused instantly on a specific point, roughly 1,200 yards away. A figure emerged from a building at the far edge of her field of view. Through her scope, Sierra could see details with crystalline clarity. The figure was dressed in civilian clothes, moving with casual confidence, seemingly unaware of being observed. This was the target. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Sierra went through her calculations with automatic precision, her mind moving through the math like water flowing through a familiar channel. Distance, 1,240 yards. Wind, 8 miles per hour, quartering from left to right. Temperature, 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Elevation, minor, compensating for the slight uphill angle. Humidity low. All of these factors fed into a complex equation that her subconscious solved almost instantly, translating data into adjustments that her hands made without conscious thought. She placed her crosshairs slightly ahead and slightly above the target's center mass, accounting for wind drift and bullet drop. Her breathing slowed even further, deepening into the rhythm her father had taught her, the pattern that steadied the body and quieted the mind. Her finger rested against the trigger with the perfect amount of pressure, neither too much nor too little, just present and ready. The target paused, looking at something Sierra couldn't see. This was the moment. The window was open. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, becoming both infinite and impossibly brief. Sierra squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked, the recoil pushing against her shoulder with familiar force. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's path, saw the target react, saw the marker that indicated a successful hit appear on the figure's chest. The shot had been perfect, dead center, exactly where she had aimed, despite the distance, despite the wind, despite the angle, despite everything. For a moment, Sierra simply lay there, her heart pounding with adrenaline and relief and triumph. She had done it. Against everything Keller had thrown at her, against all the doubt and criticism and sabotage, she had made the shot. She had proven, at least to herself, that she belonged here. She packed her gear methodically, taking her time, allowing her body to relax, and her mind to settle. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. It was beautiful, and for the first time in weeks, Sierra allowed herself to simply appreciate it, to feel the satisfaction of a job well done without immediately moving on to the next challenge. She returned to base as the last light was fading from the sky. Other students were already there, gathered around the instructors, talking in excited voices about their shots, about the challenge, about the relief of having completed the final test. Sierra joined them quietly, not drawing attention to herself, content to remain on the periphery. But Chen saw her arrive and broke away from the group with a huge grin on his face. "Valdez, tell me you made the shot." "I made the shot," Sierra confirmed, unable to suppress a small smile. "I knew it." Chen grabbed her shoulder. "What was your distance?" 1,240 yards. Chen's eyes widened. "Are you serious? That was the longest shot anyone got today. Most of us were around 800 or 900. You're a machine, Valdez." Other students gathered around, asking questions, offering congratulations, displaying a camaraderie that Sierra hadn't experienced before. For the first time since arriving at Fort Huachuca, she felt like part of the group rather than an outsider, like someone who had earned her place through ability rather than someone who was being tolerated despite her presence. And then Keller appeared. He walked through the group like an icebreaker through frozen. "Sir," his presence creating instant silence. His face was set in its usual expression of stern neutrality, revealing nothing. He looked at Sierra with those cold blue eyes, and for a moment, she thought she saw something flicker there. Something that might have been respect or acknowledgement, or at least a grudging admission that she had exceeded his expectations. "Valdez," he said. A word. They walked away from the group, moving to a quiet area near the equipment sheds where they wouldn't be overheard. The last light was draining from the sky, stars beginning to appear in the darkening vault above. The desert night was bringing its characteristic cold, the temperature dropping rapidly now that the sun had set. Keller was silent for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing words. He didn't want to swallow. Finally he spoke. "Your shot was good," he said, the words clearly costing him something to produce. Better than good. It was exceptional. Sierra waited, sensing there was more. "But I want you to understand something." Keller turned to face her fully. "I've been hard on you because this isn't a game. Out there in real operations, nobody's going to cut you slack. Because you're a woman, or because you had a tough childhood, or because you try hard. They're going to expect perfection every single time, and the cost of failure is people die. I've been trying to prepare you for that reality." It was a rationalization, and they both knew it. But there was something in his voice that suggested he might actually believe it, that he had convinced himself his Cruelty was actually a form of care, tough love taken to its logical and destructive extreme. "With all due respect, Staff Sergeant," Sierra said quietly, "I don't think breaking someone down is the same as building them up. I don't think making someone doubt themselves makes them stronger. And I don't think you were trying to prepare me for anything except failure." Keller's face hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not," Sierra acknowledged, "but I know that I made it through this course despite you, not because of you. And I know that if you treated everyone the way you treated me, nobody would graduate." She could see anger rising in his face, could see him struggling with the urge to lash out, to reassert dominance, to put her back in what he considered her proper place. But before he could respond, before the confrontation could escalate into something that couldn't be walked back, an alarm began wailing across the base. It was the emergency signal, a sound that every soldier knew instinctively meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. Keller's head snapped toward the sound, his training overriding his anger in an instant. All around them, lights were coming on, people were running, voices were shouting commands. "All personnel to the command center," someone was yelling. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Keller and Sierra ran together, their conflict temporarily forgotten in the face of larger crisis. They joined the stream of soldiers, converging on the command center, a low concrete building at the center of the base. Inside, chaos. Officers clustered around radio equipment, faces tense, voices urgent. The base commander was standing at the center of the room, his face grave. "Listen up." His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "We have a situation. A training helicopter went down approximately 40 miles north of here in the Dragoon Mountains. 4 personnel on board, including 2 students from the sniper course. Early reports suggest mechanical failure, possible hard landing in extremely rough terrain. Weather is deteriorating rapidly. We've got a storm system moving in from the west that's going to make aerial rescue impossible within 2 hours. We need to get a ground team out there now." He gestured to a map spread across the central table. "The crash site is here, in a canyon system. That's basically inaccessible by vehicle. It's going to be a hike in rough terrain, probably 8 to 10 miles depending on route selection. The students on that helicopter are Davidson and Marshall." Sierra felt her stomach drop. Davidson, the recruit who had been on her team during the urban combat scenarios. Marshall, quiet kid from Oregon, who never said much but was consistently solid in performance. And 2 crew members whose names she didn't know but who were soldiers nonetheless, people who needed help. "I need volunteers," the commander continued. "But understand this is going to be dangerous. Rough terrain, night operations, incoming weather, unknown injuries at the crash site. We're asking for trained personnel only. Combat medics, experienced mountain operations, anyone with relevant skills." Hands went up throughout the room. Sierra's among them. The commander's eyes swept the group, assessing, selecting. His gaze lingered on Sierra for a moment, and she saw his expression shift through several emotions: surprise, consideration, doubt. She was the newest member of the sniper course, still technically a student, female, small, not the obvious choice for a dangerous mountain rescue. But before he could make a decision, Keller stepped forward. "Sir, I volunteer to lead the ground team, and I recommend Valdez come along. She's got mountain experience, and we're going to need someone who can navigate that terrain in the dark." Everyone in the room turned to look at Keller, shock evident on multiple faces. Sierra felt her own surprise like a physical impact. After everything, after weeks of undermining and criticism, he was recommending her. It didn't make sense. The commander looked between them, clearly trying to understand the dynamic. Then he nodded sharply. "Fine. Keller, you're team leader. Pick 6 more. Gear up and wheels rolling in 15 minutes. Dismissed." The room exploded into motion. Sierra moved on autopilot, heading to the equipment room, grabbing gear, her mind racing. She couldn't figure out Keller's angle, couldn't understand why he had vouched for her. Part of her wondered if it was some kind of trap, another test designed to expose her weakness. She was checking her medical kit when Keller appeared beside her, gearing up with the same swift efficiency. He didn't look at her, just spoke in a low voice while he worked. "Don't read too much into this," he said. "You know the terrain, and we need that right now. This doesn't change anything between us." "I didn't think it did," Sierra replied, her voice neutral. They finished gearing up in silence and joined the rest of the team outside. 6 soldiers total, Keller, Sierra, 2 combat medics and 2 experienced mountain warfare instructors. They loaded into 2 trucks and rolled out into the night, headlights cutting through darkness that seemed absolute and consuming. The drive took 40 minutes, following rough roads that deteriorated into barely visible tracks and finally ended at a trailhead where the terrain became too rough for vehicles. They dismounted, checked their gear one final time, and began hiking into the mountains with headlamps, providing narrow cones of light in the encompassing darkness. The terrain was brutal, loose rock that shifted under every step, steep inclines that required hands as well as feet, thorny vegetation that caught at clothing and gear. The temperature continued dropping and the wind was picking up, gusting unpredictably, carrying the scent of approaching rain. They moved in single file, Keller in front, navigating by GPS and instinct, pushing hard despite the difficulty. Sierra moved with the confidence of someone who had grown up in places like this, her mountain-learned instincts translating perfectly to this environment. She watched Keller's back, watched the way he selected routes, the way he distributed his weight, the decisions he made about where to place his feet. He was good. She had to admit, maybe even excellent. Whatever his flaws as a person, he was a competent soldier. 2 hours into the hike, the storm hit. It came with sudden ferocity, wind whipping through the canyon with enough force to knock smaller rocks loose, rain falling in sheets that turned the ground slippery and treacherous within minutes. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, headlamps reflecting off the rain to create disorienting halos of light that revealed nothing useful. The team slowed, forced to navigate by feel as much as sight, the danger level rising exponentially. "We need to find shelter," one of the medics shouted over the wind. "Wait this out." "No time," Keller shouted back. "Those people have been out here for 3 hours already. We keep moving." They pushed forward, difficulty increasing with every step. The rain made everything slick, turned dust into mud, transformed minor obstacles into serious hazards. Lightning began flashing across the sky, illuminating the landscape in brief, strobing moments that revealed just how precarious their situation had become. They were traversing a narrow ridge with steep drops on both sides, moving along a path that was barely wide enough for single file. Sierra's heart pounded, but her hands remained steady. This was what she had trained for, what her entire childhood had prepared her for. She moved with careful precision, testing each foothold before committing her weight, using her understanding of stone and slope to find the safe path. Behind her, she could hear one of the instructors breathing hard, struggling with the pace and the conditions. The GPS unit indicated they were close, maybe half a mile from the crash site. The canyon was narrowing, the walls rising on either side, funneling the wind into a howling corridor that made communication almost impossible. They rounded a bend and suddenly there it was, the helicopter, or what remained of it. The aircraft had impacted on a steep slope and tumbled, coming to rest wedged between 2 large boulders with its rotor blades twisted into abstract sculptures of destruction. The fuselage was crumpled, but mostly intact, which suggested the crew might have survived the initial impact. Keller signaled for the team to spread out, to approach carefully in case of fuel leaks or unstable wreckage. Sierra moved with the others, her medical training kicking in, mentally preparing to assess injuries and provide treatment. They reached the helicopter, and Keller wrenched open the side door, his headlamp illuminating the interior. 3 people inside. One of the pilots was clearly dead, his neck bent at an angle that made further assessment unnecessary. The co-pilot was unconscious but breathing, blood covering half his face from a head wound. And in the back, Davidson and Marshall, both alive but injured. Davidson had a compound fracture of his left leg, the bone visible through torn skin, his face pale with shock and pain. Marshall had taken a piece of shrapnel through his shoulder, the metal still embedded, blood soaking through his uniform. The medics moved in immediately, assessing, stabilizing, working with practiced efficiency despite the conditions. Sierra helped where she could, holding equipment, providing light, doing whatever the medics needed. Within minutes, they had the injured stabilized enough for transport, but there was a problem. "We can't evacuate them in this weather," one of the medics said, looking at the storm raging around them. "Moving them in these conditions could kill them. We need to wait it out. Keep them warm and stable until we can get a helicopter in at first light." Keller nodded grimly. "All right, we dig in here. Set up whatever shelter we can, rotate watch, keep them alive until morning. The team went to work, using emergency tarps and the wreckage itself to create a makeshift shelter that blocked some of the wind and rain. They got the injured into sleeping bags, started warming them with chemical heat packs, began the long process of monitoring vitals and preventing shock from setting in. It was going to be a long night. Sierra found herself on watch rotation with Keller, the two of them sitting near the entrance to their improvised shelter, while the others tried to get some rest. The storm continued its assault, lightning illuminating the canyon in irregular bursts, thunder rolling like artillery fire. They sat in silence for a long time, the situation too tense for conversation. Then Davidson stirred, his eyes opening, consciousness returning through the fog of pain and medication. He looked around, disoriented, trying to understand where he was. His gaze found Sierra, and his expression went through several rapid changes. Recognition, confusion, something that might have been embarrassment. "Valdez!" His voice was weak, barely audible over the storm. "I'm here, Davidson. You're going to be okay. We've got you stabilized." He tried to sit up, winced, fell back. "My leg, broken, but the medics have it secured. You'll need surgery when we get you back to base, but you're not in immediate danger." Davidson closed his eyes, processing this information. When he opened them again, they were wet with something that might have been tears, or might have been rain dripping from above. I didn't think you'd come. After everything." Sierra understood immediately what he meant. Davidson had been one of the students who had participated in the mockery, who had made comments and jokes at her expense, who had treated her as an outsider rather than a peer. Not as viciously as Keller, but complicit nonetheless, part of the system that had tried to break her down. "We're soldiers," Sierra said simply. "We don't leave people behind." "I was an asshole to you," Davidson continued, the words tumbling out like confession. "We all were. We let Keller set the tone and we went along with it. Made it worse. I'm sorry, Valdez. I'm really sorry." Sierra was quiet for a moment, considering her response. She thought about all the small cruelties, all the casual dismissals, all the times when simple decency would have made the difference, but nobody had offered it. She thought about how alone she had felt, how isolated, how close she had come to breaking. But she also thought about her father, about the lessons he had taught her about strength and grace, about how true character was revealed, not in how you treated your friends, but in how you treated your enemies. She thought about the promise she had made over his coffin, to serve with integrity, to be better than the worst examples around her. "You don't have to apologize right now," she said finally. "You're injured and in shock, and probably on some pretty heavy painkillers. Let's just focus on getting you home alive. We can talk about the rest later." "No, I need to say this." Davidson's hand reached out, found her arm, gripped it with surprising strength. "You saved my life. You came out here in this storm, risked your own life to save someone who didn't deserve it. That's what a real soldier looks like. And I'm ashamed it took this for me to see it." The words hit Sierra harder than she expected, breaking through defenses she had built so carefully over the past weeks. She felt emotion rising in her throat, tears threatening, and she had to look away to maintain composure. Across the shelter, she could see Keller watching this exchange, his face unreadable in the shadows. "Get some rest, Davidson," she managed. "We've got a long walk back tomorrow." The night stretched on, time becoming fluid and uncertain. The storm gradually weakened, the rain diminishing to drizzle and then stopping altogether, though the wind continued its restless prowling through the canyon. Sierra stayed awake through most of it, checking on the injured, helping the medics monitor vital signs, doing whatever small tasks needed doing. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with tentative light, the sound of helicopter rotors echoed through the canyon. Medevac, arriving now that the weather had cleared enough for safe flight. The team helped load the injured, careful and methodical despite everyone's exhaustion. Within 20 minutes, the helicopter was lifting off, carrying Davidson and Marshall and the injured pilot back to base and proper medical care. The ground team began the long hike back to their vehicles, moving slowly, fatigue making every step an effort. They emerged from the mountains as the sun was fully up, casting long shadows across the desert, warming air that had been painfully cold just hours before. The trucks were where they had left them, patient and dependable, promising. Transportation back to something resembling civilization. They loaded up in silence, too tired for conversation, and began the drive back to Fort Huachuca. Sierra sat in the back of the truck, watching the landscape roll past, feeling the adrenaline and stress gradually draining from her system, leaving behind a hollowness that wasn't entirely unpleasant. She had done it. She had performed under the worst possible conditions, had saved lives, had proven to herself and to others that she belonged here. Back at base, the commander was waiting to debrief them. He listened to Keller's report, asked clarifying questions, made notes. When Keller finished, the commander turned to Sierra. Specialist Valdez, Staff Sergeant Keller indicates you performed exceptionally during the rescue operation. Is there anything you'd like to add to his report? Sierra shook her head. No, sir, it was a team effort. Everyone did their job. The commander studied her for a moment, then nodded. Dismissed. Get some rest. You've earned it. The team dispersed, heading to their quarters, eager for showers and sleep and food. Sierra was halfway to her barracks when she heard someone calling her name. She turned to find Keller approaching, his expression uncertain in a way she had never seen before. Valdez, wait. She waited, too tired to be defensive, too worn down to maintain the walls she had built around herself. Keller stopped a few feet away, and for a long moment he just looked at her. Then he spoke, his voice quiet and rough. What Davidson said last night. He was right. About all of it. Sierra said nothing, just watched him struggle with words that clearly didn't come easily. I was wrong, Keller continued. About you. About everything. I convinced myself I was making you stronger, preparing you for reality, but the truth is I was just... He paused, searching for words. I was threatened. By your competence, by your determination, by the fact that you made it look easy when it should have been impossible. And instead of being professional, instead of being the instructor I'm supposed to be, I tried to break you because seeing you succeed made me feel like less. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest, in a way that felt almost painful. I'm sorry, Keller said, and the words sounded like they cost him everything. You deserved better. You deserved respect and proper instruction, and the same treatment everyone else got. And instead I gave you hell because I'm a small, insecure man who couldn't handle the fact that you were better than I ever was at your age. Sierra felt tears threatening again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. She let them come, let them run down her face, the release of weeks of pent-up emotion and stress and pain. Do you have any idea how close I came to quitting? She asked, her voice breaking. How many nights I lay awake wondering if everyone was right, if I was fooling myself, if I should just give up. I know, Keller said quietly. I could see it, and I should have stopped, should have pulled back, but I kept pushing because part of me wanted you to quit, wanted to be right about you, and I hate that about myself. Why did you recommend me for the rescue team? Sierra asked. After everything, why did you do that? Because when it mattered, when there were lives on the line, I needed the best. And despite everything I've done to you, despite every obstacle I put in your way, you're the best mountain operator I've seen in 20 years of service. When it counted, when it was real, I couldn't afford my pride or my prejudice. I needed you. Sierra wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to process everything she was feeling. Anger, relief, vindication, exhaustion, all swirling together into something too complex to name. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said honestly. Not right now, maybe not ever. What you did hurt me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I know, Keller said, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking that you know I see you now. I see what you are, what you've always been, and I'm sorry it took a crisis for me to pull my head out of my ass. They stood there in the morning sun, two soldiers separated by rank and experience and history, but connected by the shared understanding of what service meant, of what it cost, of what it demanded. Finally, Sierra nodded. Not agreement exactly, but acknowledgement. A beginning, perhaps, of something different. I need to get some sleep, she said. Yeah, Keller agreed. Me too. They parted ways, heading to their respective quarters. Sierra collapsed onto her bunk without even taking off her boots, her body giving out completely, surrendering to exhaustion that felt like drowning. She slept for 14 hours straight, dreamless and deep, and when she woke, the world seemed different somehow, sharper and clearer and more real. The next day brought the graduation ceremony for the sniper course. The students who had survived the program assembled in dress uniforms. Families and friends gathered to watch. the base commander presiding over the formal acknowledgement of their achievement. Sierra stood in formation, feeling the weight of everything that had brought her to this moment, and when her name was called, when she walked forward to receive her diploma and her sniper qualification badge, she felt her father's presence as clearly as if he were standing beside her. The commander shook her hand, his grip firm and respectful. "Outstanding work, Specialist." "Valdez, the Army is lucky to have you." "Thank you, sir." As she returned to formation, she caught Keller's eye. He was standing to the side, watching the ceremony with the other instructors. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't make any overt gesture, but something passed between them, some acknowledgement that transcended words, an understanding that the path forward would be different than the path behind. After the ceremony, as families mingled and celebrated, Chen approached Sierra with a huge grin and a bottle of sparkling cider he had somehow acquired. "We made it, Valdez. I can't believe we actually made it." "You did great, Chen. You should be proud." "Me? You're the one who made the longest shot in class history. You're the one who went on a mountain rescue operation the night before graduation. You're the one who..." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "You're the one who showed all of us what real strength looks like. I just want you to know that." Other students gathered around, offering similar sentiments, congratulations mixed with apologies for their earlier behavior, acknowledgement that they had been wrong to follow Keller's lead. Sierra accepted it, all with grace, understanding that people were complicated, that everyone made mistakes, that the measure of character wasn't perfection, but the willingness to grow and change. Davidson approached last, moving carefully on crutches, his leg in a cast. He had insisted on being present for the graduation despite the doctor's recommendations, determined to be there. He stopped in front of Sierra, balanced precariously, and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Sierra took his hand, felt the strength in his grip, saw the genuine gratitude in his eyes. "You would have done the same for me," she said, though they both knew that might not be true, that sometimes belief had to precede reality, that saying something made it more likely to become real. "I hope so," Davidson said. "I hope I become the kind of soldier who would." As the celebration continued around her, Sierra found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her here, about all the pain and struggle and doubt. She thought about her father, about the promises she had made and kept, about the price of belonging and the cost of proving yourself in a world that didn't want to make space for you. She thought about Keller, about the complexity of forgiveness and redemption, about how people could be both terrible and capable of growth at the same time. And she thought about what came next. This was just the beginning, after all. The real work lay ahead, the actual missions, the genuine dangers, the true test of everything she had learned. But for the first time since arriving at Fort Huachuca, Sierra felt ready, not because she had proven something to others, but because she had proven something to herself. She belonged here not because anyone had given her permission, but because she had earned it through competence and determination and an unwillingness to be broken by circumstance. The sun was setting now, painting the Arizona desert in shades of gold and crimson, the temperature dropping as it always did when night approached. Sierra stood apart from the celebration, looking out at the mountains in the distance, feeling the wind on her face, remembering her father's hands teaching her to aim, his voice telling her that accuracy was a function of understanding, his faith that she could be anything she wanted if she was willing to work for it. She felt him there, with her, felt his approval and his pride, felt the promise fulfilled. And in that moment, standing alone but not lonely, exhausted but not defeated, she understood that the struggle had been necessary, that without the pressure and the pain, she would never have discovered what she was truly capable of. The mountains had taught her patience, the army had taught her strength, and Keller had inadvertently taught her that the only opinion that mattered was her own. Later that evening, as darkness settled fully over the base and the celebration wound down, Sierra returned to her barracks to pack her gear for her next assignment. She was moving on to operational training, preparing to join an active unit, taking the next step in a career that would span decades and continents, that would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. She was folding uniforms when there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Keller standing there, looking uncertain in a way that still seemed strange and unfamiliar. "I won't keep you," he said. "I just wanted to give you this." He held out a small wooden box, weathered and worn. Sierra took it, opened it carefully. Inside was a single rifle, a round brass polished to a mirror shine, sitting on a bed of dark velvet. "That's the round you fired on your final qualification," Keller explained. "The 1,200-yard shot. I retrieved it from the target range. It's traditional to keep your best shot, to remind yourself what you're capable of when everything is on the line." Sierra looked at the round, at the careful way it had been, cleaned and presented, at the small gesture that represented something larger than itself. "Thank you," she said quietly. Keller nodded. "You're going to do great things, Valdez, and I'm genuinely sorry I tried to stop that from happening. For what it's worth, I'll be better. To the students who come after you, to everyone, you taught me something important about what leadership actually means." "I hope that's true," Sierra said. "It is." He straightened, came to attention, and rendered a formal salute, crisp and respectful and absolutely sincere. "Good luck, Specialist. The Army is fortunate to have you." Sierra returned the salute, holding it for a moment that felt heavy with meaning, with closure, with the beginning of something new. Then Keller turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor, leaving Sierra alone with her thoughts and her memories and her future. She closed the door, returned to packing, but kept the wooden box out on her desk where she could see it. The brass round caught the light from her desk lamp, gleaming like a promise, like a reminder, like a declaration that she had been tested and had not been found wanting. The next morning, Sierra Valdez shipped out to her first operational assignment, carrying with her everything she had learned, everything she had proven, everything she had become. Behind her lay Fort Huachuca and the sniper course, and the man who had tried to break her, but had instead made her stronger. Ahead lay years of service, of missions both successful and failed, of friendships forged in the crucible of combat, of a career that would eventually make her one of the most respected soldiers in the Army's history. But that night, in her quarters, packing her final belongings, Sierra allowed herself one moment of pure triumph, one instant of uncomplicated pride. She had survived. She had succeeded. She had proven that courage doesn't have a gender, that competence speaks louder than prejudice, and that sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to quit when everything and everyone tells you to give up. Because real strength, she had learned, wasn't about overpowering obstacles. It was about outlasting them. It was about being patient enough and stubborn enough and determined enough to still be standing when the dust settled and the smoke cleared. It was about choosing honor over resentment, about saving lives even when they belonged to people who had hurt you, about forgiving without forgetting, about moving forward without being defined by the past. And as Sierra closed her footlocker and locked it tight, as she prepared to step into the next chapter of her story, she carried with her the knowledge that she had not only survived the test, but had transformed it into something meaningful, had taken pain and pressure and prejudice and alchemized it all into purpose. The mountains had taught her patience, the Army had taught her strength, and Keller had inadvertently taught her the most important lesson of all, that the only limits that matter are the ones you place on yourself, and that every obstacle is just another opportunity to prove what you're really made. So if you believe that true strength means lifting others up, even when they've tried to bring you down, comment honor below.